Our gospel reading comes from the 10th chapter of Mark, is again found for you on your insert. On the way to Jerusalem, the disciples asked Jesus to grant them seats of honor. Jesus responds by announcing that he and his followers will rule through self-giving service. A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. With the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This is the gospel of our Lord. In 2013, Sheryl Sandberg published a book entitled Lean In. The book hinged around advice to women who sometimes, as they're planning for having families, lean back. Instead of putting in for a promotion, stay in the position they are. The argument in that book was that they should assume that they could do what was needed, that they should lean in, and by so doing they will find the opportunity for success. The ideas have been percolating, and one can find traces of them in a TED Talk which she gave in 2010, and again in a commencement speech given at Barnard College in 2011. With the publication of the book in 2013, Lean In became the idiom of the moment for headline writers, the Twitterati, and New Yorker cartoonists. Inevitably, it has moved beyond mere shorthand from the ideas mapped out in Ms. Sandberg's book, which urges women to assertively pursue careers, ambitions, combine niceness with insistence, and demand that their partners share equally in childcare. Lean In is also more in that now it is also a foundation, and it seeks to create a community and a movement. Now, as with all things, there are champions and critics. One such critique came out this week in an interview by Gary Gutting with Nancy Fraser in the New York Times. The discussion is around the ideas of feminism and the philosophy professor's book, Fortunes of Feminism. She writes, "For me, feminism is not simply a matter of getting a smattering of individual women into positions of power and privilege within existing social hierarchies. It is rather about overcoming those hierarchies. This requires challenging the structural sources of gender domination in capitalist society. Above all, the institutionalized separation of two supposedly distinct kinds of activity. On the one hand, so-called productive labor, historically associated with men and remunerated by wages. On the other hand, caring activities, often historically unpaid, still performed mainly by women." She writes, "In my view, this gendered hierarchical division between production and reproduction is a defining structure of capitalist society and a deep source of the gender asymmetries hardwired within it. There can be no emancipation of women so long as this structure remains intact. She goes on in response to another question for more detail. As I see it, the mainstream feminism of our time has adapted an approach that cannot achieve justice even for women, let alone anyone else. The trouble is that this feminism is focused on encouraging educated middle-class women to lean in and crack the glass ceiling. In other words, to climb the corporate ladder. By definition, then, its beneficiaries can only be women of the professional managerial class. And absent structural changes in capitalist society, those women can only benefit by leaning on others, by offloading their own care work and housework onto low-waged, precarious workers, typically racialized and/or immigrant women. So this is not and cannot be a feminism for all women. It's been one of those weeks where there's been a lot of attention on who is leaning in and who's not. On Tuesday, the first Democratic debate of this presidential campaign took place, and there was much discussion about how far Vice President Joe Biden was leaning in. Rumor had it that debate moderators had reserved him a podium should he throw his hat in the ring at the last moment. He's leaning back, leaning in. It may even be a story in your paper this morning about just where that is. On the other side of the aisle, there are the pleas to Paul Ryan to step up and take the position as Speaker of the House of Representatives. The news I have read says he doesn't want the job. He's happy with his current job. He's got young children and he doesn't want to lose that opportunity to be with his family. Yet the calls are coming, depending on what article you read or what station you watch. He may have leaned in just a little. He's still leaning back. Once again, there's probably some news this morning on the status of where he is. The letter to Hebrews spends a great deal of time talking about priests and high priests. Although we are zeroing in on that language today, it runs throughout the entire letter. What is a very minor theme in the rest of the New Testament, we can find traces of it here and there, is a big deal in this letter. Among the chief points being made at this point is that one does not presume take upon oneself the honor of becoming high priest. It takes it only when called by God. Jesus didn't take for himself the role or position of high priest, but was called by God. Did Jesus lean in? He didn't become the source of salvation for all by leaning back. How do we think about the ways in which Jesus was an assertive actor in realizing his own destiny, and on the other hand was a passive individual to whom things happen, and to whom power and glory have been given? James and John ask Jesus to be in positions where they can make a real difference in the world to come. They lean in to be in these positions of power, whereby they can change the world. Sure, maybe part of it was about the privileges and perks that come with being in such positions. But maybe it was an honest and genuine request for the responsibility of power. Jesus doesn't chastise them for leaning in, although he does say that the matter is above his pay grade. He suggests that there is another way to lean in, to serve. Now we speak of public service, but there are different positions of public service, right? And some of those positions, such as President of the United States, require more ambition than others. Despite the way Jesus seems to differentiate between ambition and service, in our world, the two often have a more complex and symbiotic relationship. As we've kind of hinted at, they have a similar relationship in the life of Jesus as well. Both our reading in the letter to the Hebrews and the Gospel of Mark suggest that there is a hierarchy within God's self. However, the church, with very few exceptions, has confessed that God exists in a trinity of persons who are co-equal. There is no hierarchy in God. The Father is not more God, does not have more power than either the Spirit or the Son. Yet, the writer to the Hebrews suggests that Jesus is made, is called to be, is obedient, is submissive. He suggests that there's something different in the relationship that sounds a little hierarchical. When Jesus suggests to James and John that the ability to put individuals into the seats on his right and left is not his to give, he suggests there may be a hierarchy. As Nancy Fraser said, and as the church has said again and again, the goal is not to manage the hierarchy, but to overcome the hierarchy. Yet, very often, so many different ways, we have created hierarchies in our concepts of God. And we have established hierarchies within our human relationships. Instead, we've even established hierarchies in the very society of Jesus, the church, the living body of Christ, in which there is one, and all members, although different, are equal, or at least in theory. There is much theological diversity within Christianity and the church at large. One place in which there is an incredible amount of unity and agreement is around the idea of calling. Almost all Christians agree that the calling of clergy and pastors is rooted in the call that comes to all Christians in their baptism. We are all called to follow Christ. We are all called to make disciples. We are all called to become a professional person of law is simply another way of answering that call. And at many an ordination service you will hear that said again and again from churches Presbyterian and Lutheran to Methodist and Congregationalist. If there are differences, right? I don't like language that speaks of a higher calling. There's no qualitative difference. So we need a way to recognize that we are called in different ways. Or there's one calling, but we respond in different ways because we're all unique individuals with distinct histories, personalities. Let's talk about that. We talk about someone having a vocation, a calling. Do we believe that God calls some people to be police officers and others to be firefighter paramedics. We believe that God calls some people to be doctors and nurses and others to be educators. How do we distinguish between the gifts and graces that God gives an individual and their own desires and the calling of God? If we believe that God calls some to be doctors and some to be teachers, we believe God calls some to be retail workers and housekeepers. Are some called to be homemakers, while others are called to be politicians? Now, according to the letter to the Hebrews, particular individuals receive very specific callings, very specific tasks, namely that of being high priest. Now, one of the more amusing things about this conversation about the Speaker of the House of Representatives, for those of you who have been paying attention, is that it's come up that there's a technicality that says the Speaker doesn't actually have to be a member of the House. And if no one in the House wants the job and they can't agree on who should get the job, maybe they'll have to call somebody outside to come in and do it. Within religious work, we speak of two different kinds of leaders. In Jewish and Christian circles, we talk about priests, and we talk about prophets. Now, priests are those who are part of the religious institution. They go to schooling and training, and they are brought up in the institution. Prophets are charismatic leaders. Take Amos. Amos was a farmer who God calls, and he comes and functions as a prophet. We think Isaiah may have been a priest who God calls and functions as a prophet. How do we understand these differences between those who come up within the institution and those who come out from outside of the institution, the difference in their callings and functions? Now, I would suggest that priests are those who lean in. I would like to be a religious leader. I'll go to the schoolings, I'll attend the courses, I'll volunteer to lead. Maybe the prophets are those who haven't lent in. Well, maybe some have. Right? Isaiah may have been a priest. He leaned in at some point, but Amos was happy to run his farm, take care of his sycamore trees. He wasn't stepping into this position. If you want another metaphor to think about it like this. Prophets are the political outsiders. Priests are the career politicians. Different ways to think about the way these things interact. And we could borrow language from other religious traditions, talk about shamans and medicine men. I think that just clouds the issue. I think priests and prophets make enough sense. So where does this leave us? Is it okay to lean in? What is the difference between presumption and ambition and humility? What does God call us to? Does God have radically specific callings on our lives? Does God care what A school you come to? Does God care what assignment you ask for after A school? I believe that the call of God calls from below being to what is beyond, calls us forth to what is promised up ahead, and calls us back to the long forgotten. Call doesn't have power pure and simple, but the powerless power of provocation or a summons, a soliciting, seductive power. But it does not have an army to lend its support. And nothing stops us from turning a deaf ear to it. the voice of God, the Word of God, the Spirit of God, is the call that calls to you without causality, power, or prestige. It's calling to what is best in you. What is best in us is goodness, truth, justice, and the like. What is best in us is not scripted into a specific response. There are many goods. There are many good assignments. I believe that the call of God is always a rule, a draw, an invitation. It's never coercive, never makes us. God called Abraham. Maybe God was calling, Abraham was the only one who heard. What that means is that the call of God, which establishes our destiny, never violates our faith. Let me put this another way. I believe there are many people who are working in the medical profession for whom it is not a vocation. They chose that path for prosperity, for what it did for them, for what they could get out of it, maybe even for more noble reasons. There are others for whom it is a vocation, a response, and a calling. Yet even then, I don't believe the call was to be an oncologist or a paramedic. The call of God was to realize the best in themselves and the good of all, and their gifts and their desires and their gifts and graces coalesced around this thing. And they made a decision to enter a training program, or go to this school, or choose this career path. They made choices, and they ended up where they are. The call was not to a specific career, but to the best in themselves. And we could look at many other career fields to make the same point. Our lives are lived in the tension created by the force of our destiny and the force of our freedom. Now, our destiny can be understood as those things which limit our freedom. Take any person from the history books, Abraham Lincoln, for example. His destiny was determined by where and when he was born, just as ours is. Had he been born in another time, in another place, his life would not have unfolded the way it did. Opportunities would not have presented him. He would not have had the ability to exercise his freedom in those moments. The same goes for us. Furthermore, the exercise of our freedom creates our destiny. At any given moment, we may find ourselves with a variety of different paths to choose from. If I take this path, I may not get to take this path. It's not bad or good, they're both good paths. We may come and we may pray, God, which path should I take? I may say they're both good paths. Which would you like to take? There may be times when we only have one way out that is good. There may be times when there are many. Sometimes a path we're on will circle back and we'll get an opportunity to do one of those other paths. Sometimes they're only open to us at this one moment in time. And choosing this good thing means that we don't get to choose that good thing. Our freedom, our choices shape our destiny. What does this mean? We should not be arrogant or presumptuous, but we should listen for the call of God. We should lean in. What else does it mean to show up at church on a Sunday morning if it doesn't mean to lean in and hear the call of God? And we can lean in. 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 We can le never know when the decisions we make today will make possible a response in the future that we cannot imagine now. The disciples got mad at James and John for leaning in, for wanting these positions. Jesus doesn't chastise them. He says, you bumped in for something that is beyond even me. But they did lean in. They leaned in to follow. They leaned in to be close. They leaned in to listen. They leaned in and led the early church. I invite you this morning to lean in to the call of God.